Well, good afternoon. Hello, and thank you for joining us today. As New York approaches a cautious reopening process with phase one expected soon, the role of traditional office space remains uncertain. Despite that, PincusCo reported this week that the first half of May saw a surge in their dollar volume of build-outs and renovation projects with the DOB, proving that large tenants and landlords are still moving forward in that capacity. However, office leasing volume is very low, as is investment sales volume. To get a sense of the market, we're joined today by Jodi, Pulice, founder and CEO of JRT Realty Group, James Nelson, principal at Avison Young, Jeremy Moss, executive vice president at Silverstein Properties, and Brian Cohen, partner at Goulston and Storrs. Before we start, I'd like to remind our listeners that you can ask a question through the chat function, as we'll be taking questions at the end of the hour. First, we'd like to discuss the office leasing market in Manhattan and the outer boroughs. And then in the second half of the program, we'll be discussing investment sales. And then finally, we'll be taking those questions. So Jodi, I'd like to begin with you to talk about how the market, what's going on in the market right now.
Yeah, thank you, Adam, and thanks very much for inviting me to this webinar. So, we've been hit with obviously obstacles. It is our bread and butter for leasing to be able to tour spaces and show spaces. And of course, that's absolutely not permitted at this point. I have heard of certain road brokers that are doing things as far as showing, but, I, as a real estate owner, do not condone it. But it's sad to see. I'm sure there are a lot of brokers that are hurting for business, and at this time they're doing many things to try to get their customers to see space. But there are things that are coming up that are being used that's also very positive. There's, I'm sure you folks have heard of Matterport, which is a video, and if a lot of the flyers that are coming out over emails have video of the spaces, which is very helpful and could be used as a great tool for the brokers. They could actually escort their tenants through the spaces through the video. So a lot of people are using video, and some brokers actually prior to this had video spaces, so they have videos on their phones that they've been sharing with their tenants.
So I want to just ask everyone kind of how they're seeing the market right now, and then we'll dive into the specifics. I'd like to get back with Jodi about the questions of how people are touring spaces, because I find that fascinating. Jeremy, could you talk a bit, just from your perspective, from the landlord side as representing Silverstein, what you're doing in terms of handling incoming leases, existing leases, new leases, that sort of thing? Just an overview.
Sure. So we're very much focused on getting the buildings ready for everyone's return. I think that's at the heart of all of this. I think people are trying to get a handle on what their business will look like going into the second half of this year. And that's really consumed a lot of people's energy, both within our existing portfolio and people that are looking for space. I just don't think space procurement is at the top of everybody's list right now. With respect to tenants that we were actively talking to prior to, COVID-19, they said, look, there's sort of a couple of things that we need to get a handle on. One, is our space requirement going to change at all? Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Will the space itself look any different? And also it's a resource issue. A lot of people want to make sure that they're focusing their internal resources on getting settled into, a period where everybody's working from home, right? So you think about a real estate or facilities person, procurement sort of gets set aside, because believe me, whether they call us today or 2 months from now, we're going to pick up the phone and we're going to be happy to lease space to somebody. But getting everybody settled in, getting IT working, that's really where people are focused in the near term. I have no doubt that as soon as people are then resettled back into the office and understand what that's going to look like, that things will pick up as there's a natural demand for office space.
Brian, just from the perspective of the attorney looking at leases being done, how are you seeing the general overview of the market right now?
Sure. Similar to what was said so far, I think one important point is that a lot of the space that can really trade right now and can be leased is pre-built space. So we're finding that on some of the smaller pre-built space, deals are getting done. On larger spaces, what's very interesting is that people now have both brokers and owners and people who are involved in the process actually have a breather or have time to sit down and think about what their space needs are in light of the overlay of COVID-19. But I think that the one important factor to really think about, and we get this from both the media and data and the many webinars that we're on, is that a light switch isn't just going to go back on and all of a sudden we're going to funnel back into these buildings. The world, at least for the foreseeable near future, is going to be much different in the way that we use space and the way that space needs to be configured and the way that buildings need to address health issues, both building systems and building management, are very different. And it's a real learning process right now. And I'm sure both from a broker's perspective and an owner's perspective, they're thinking about all of these as they realize that leases naturally roll, and they're going to have to find a way to fill these spaces and meet the needs for the near term.
Brian and Jeremy both mentioned something about, in a sense that because, well, Jeremy, from this point of view that there were not a lot of people, you're perhaps not focusing, you're focusing on how to get the building open again. But as Brian points out, there's sort of a natural flow of deals coming through. Are those the natural flow, does that get backed up in a sense, or how do you expect things to look in a year? Jodi, what do you think about that?
This is people refer to it as the new normal. I actually refer to it as the new abnormal, and I agree very much what Jeremy is saying. There are a lot of obstacles that we still have to go over with. These tenants are having issues with subway transportation, any kind of public transportation. So until I think we see the two main points which people raise coming into work is transportation and childcare. So until we see what happens with those two obstacles, I think it's going to be very hard to say a year or 18 months or 6 months. But I believe very much that what Jeremy said, people are going to come back, but I can't give a time. Everyone's always asking for a timeline. I personally don't have a timeline. I don't know if anyone else can predict anything.
And just to go a little deeper into some of the obstacles you were talking about before, I thought it was interesting that there are, obviously landlords want to get deals done. So you're hearing of brokers who are having, like, what are you hearing about people trying to kind of get around the rules right now?
Well, brokers will call building leasing agents or building owners if they know them. And basically what's been happening is building management has been showing space for the brokers. The brokers, just make a call and the building managers are showing the space, which is not supposed to be the case. And I heard, there's different ways that brokers are we're very creative people. And there are different ways that I've heard that brokers are showing. Some show up in masks, wait in the lobby, and their tenant goes up and comes down, and then they'll go to the next building. And that's problematical, because I tell my team, absolutely no way. No way, it's not to be. The Real Estate Board of New York also has that. No way. We are not to be showing space, period. But there's always different creative situations that are coming up where brokers are showing space.
And James, with investment sales, it's sort of the same rules. Are you allowed to go and see the outside of the building, or what are obstacles for you?
Sure. So yeah, as Jodi mentioned, again, we cannot be showing space either. I mean, we really have to wait till we get through Governor Cuomo's phase 1 and then phase 2. So even if construction starts up, say June 1, it'd have to be 2 weeks thereafter. So it's probably end of June once you can actually start showing space at the earliest. But yeah, in the meantime, as brokers, we can certainly be canvassing. I mean, I was driving around the city this week and looking at some sites and assemblage. And, on the sales side for development sites, that is one product that's pretty easy to show and sell, because you don't have to actually do a physical tour. The buyers can go by as well. But, for the office product that we're listing right now, we do have the video tours. We have some drone tours that we have. And we're getting a surprising amount of interest. What we are finding is that investors are still out there. Very early on into this, a couple weeks, I surveyed 100 investors, both high net worths as well as institutions, and asking them, are you still open for business? Are you still looking to invest? And 90% said yes. Now, whether or not that means that they're going to pay anywhere close to where market should be today, or they're, only looking for really, huge distress, they are looking. And I think if you look at the response we're getting now from our digital campaigns, the email blast that we set out, we're getting much higher open rates. People are at home. Many of our clients are telling us they're working harder now than they were before this all happened, because you find that your day is just one call after another, and people have become very efficient. So we are definitely trying to do as much as we can to continue to keep space, interest in the properties that we're selling, with everything that we can do besides actually physically showing the space.
I would actually just add to something that James said. The velocity in the marketing of space, both from the leasing perspective and from the investment sales perspective, was at such a speed up until when things really shut down in March. One of the things that I found a lot of people I'm working with are doing is going back to their pipeline of the deals that they were doing, and particularly those who were acquisitive in the deals that they were looking at to buy. They're going back deep into maybe as far back as 18 months or 2 years. They have time now in between, Zoom cocktail hours and everything else that's going on. And they have time to go back through this and revisit these opportunities. And those opportunities don't really require them to walk through the space if they've already done so. The beauty of what James is also describing is people can drive by the building. I think it's a little harder for what Jodi and Jeremy are handling.
From back in sort of inside the building, I do want to get to the issues of buying and selling shortly, but with the idea of not being able to show space, and so Jeremy, with some of the, it sounds like some landlords are sort of pushing the envelope here, and as you mentioned, we spoke before that you guys are not doing that. Do you think you might lose out on deals, or how do you kind of keep people's attention on your buildings?
It's not difficult. I mean, first of all, I think the folks that are running around looking at space against, state's orders are not necessarily, the kinds of folks that you'd want to do business with. I mean, I think, look, our view is we want to be a good steward, right? We're all trying to work together here to get back to work as soon as possible. And that means, people wearing face masks, if not for health reasons, just to make the other people comfortable. We can all be doing things that make the return easier and swifter. But, going against the direction of the state is not a good way to do that. That undermines the collective effort. And even when we're permitted to return to the workplace, if one person doesn't wear a face mask in a lobby, that's going to have ripple effects. The same thing on public transit. So it's really going to have to be a communal effort. And that's why, I really we're not encouraging people to do tours and schedule tours. Now, before all of this happened, we were already starting to take advantage of a myriad of technologies to allow people to preview space. Matterport and all these other devices that let you photograph and video a space can really help you narrow down your options from a leasing perspective from maybe a dozen to half a dozen options. And the other advantage of that is touring is in New York City can be time consuming and tough activity. If we can streamline it, using technology, that's going to serve brokers, it's going to serve owners, and it's going to serve tenants well. So I think as with any kind of adversity, we're learning to do things better as a result. That doesn't substitute for the importance of actually looking at a space. Ultimately, everybody should, set foot in any space they're going to lease, and we're going to need to get there. But it does allow us to keep moving. And the same thing can be said for, transactions. We've got term sheets that we're exchanging actively. We've got leases that we're negotiating actively. And, with the use of Zoom and all these other features, we're able to advance those documents right to the finish line, and that puts people in a great position to then execute or postpone whatever they decide. But we don't need to stagnate. And that's really important regardless of the industry, is doing our best not to stagnate, because the harder we work to keep business moving, the swifter the recovery will be.
Do you, maybe this is for Jodi, like, are you seeing any landlords pulling space because the quality of potential tenants is it's all discombobulated right now with who's in the market and who's pulling out of the market? Is there an idea to just like just pull it from the market right now and wait 6 months or a year?
No, I have not experienced that at all. I mean, tenants that had already seen space, as Jeremy said, and had asked for leases and are in the middle of negotiating, they're moving right ahead. I mean, people are not saying, no, I'm not going to continue with this lease, I'm not interested anymore. I mean, I haven't had one of those. Everyone seems to be moving ahead. We have a deal that we're doing right now where the tenant didn't even see the space, but it's a specific tenant and it's a specific building, and that tenant knows, we've done deals for them before. They asked us to put in a term sheet, and they're moving forward. So I think that, as Jeremy said, people have to continue to move forward with this and not make it, an end all be all, because we're going to come out of it. And when we come out on the other end, you certainly want to have everything continually moving.
And I would actually add that as a result of some of these, as a result of the current environment, where there was a stalemate in the negotiation over a lease or an expansion, the current environment has actually helped in many ways open that up. And so from some of the tenants' perspective, when they may have been stuck on an issue, those issues have sort of resolved themselves. And if the tenant is still committed to going forward and the landlord wants to make the deal, I'm seeing certain deals are getting done that were perhaps in a tough spot before this.
Or what about just like the very basic idea of, are people reducing rents right now, either midway through sort of, I don't know, is it retrading, or or from the landlord perspective, offering a reduction now because there might be fewer tenants or the ability to pay? Jeremy?
Yeah, we haven't seen a need to do that. What we're dealing with here, in our view, is a temporal issue. I always ask this, when I'm talking to a large group of people, raise your hand if you don't think that there'll be a cure or vaccine in 24 months, right? Very few people raise their hands. And I think that's a reflection of the fact that this is a temporal issue. And a price and a repricing is just not appropriate or necessary at this juncture. I think if we see a significant, loss of office using jobs that feels more permanent, then you might see some repricing because there'll be a real long-term change in demand. But that's not the trajectory we see right now. We see a temporal issue that's resulting from the impact of COVID-19. that we're gonna emerge from on some kind of a curve that's that doesn't warrant a repricing at this point. What we are doing is being more flexible on free rent, particularly because there's a construction moratorium. So, if you sign a lease today, it's not like you can go in and start building out your space. That has to be factored into the dialogue, and there has to be a fair approach to those concessions.
I actually just got an interesting question from somebody listening who was asking James. It's an investment sales question. Mostly I'm going to save these for later, but we're just asking, have you introduced any new product, or is anyone introducing new product to the market that's not distressed, just like someone bringing a building to market?
Yes, we have brought 2 new assignments to market, and we are anticipating a couple more. I mean, I think that the conversation we're having with the owners is, is there a reason why you need to transact now? And I think a lot of, especially long-term owners, maybe someone who is a discretionary seller, clearly we're not bringing that product to market. But on the flip side, it doesn't have to mean that they're completely distressed, they're about to get foreclosed on. There are some situations whether you have, we're representing one not-for-profit where they need to, raise capital, and they want to make use of a vacant building and get some proceeds for it. We have another situation where a company's looking to raise capital and they're opportunistic. So yes, maybe they have to sell at a discount now, but if their plan is to go buy other product, they're willing to transact. And we are getting good reception for this product. And the way we're kind of putting our timeframes together is, look, we're getting the initial interest out there because it always takes usually 4 to 6 weeks to get the word out there, to get people the information, to get the brokers involved. And then, really looking, okay, well, let's start beginning the tours when we can, which we're expecting mid-end of June, and then really talk about bringing those assignments to a head in July or even going into August. And I think to your point before, you were talking about, is there a pent-up demand? I mean, there isn't a lot of new product coming to market, and yet everyone's looking online. Everyone's waiting to see what's out there. So we are getting good feedback. And then the other thing I would say is there are some asset classes which we think actually benefit from all this. So we're working on an industrial property, a logistics facility. Those are in high demand right now. Medical, we've got a Walgreens in the market. That's an essential business. They're open. They're actually benefiting from all this. So I think it also depends on what the asset class is. This probably isn't the time you want to be bringing a hotel to market, or maybe, vacant retail. But, there's certainly still demand for office. There's certainly demand for multifamily and industrial medical as well.
And I think actually there would be demand, and James touched on it, in a situation where someone, let's say a long-term owner, has a property that requires a lot of active management, or has a lease turning and will have to come out for brokerage commissions and TI in order to keep that property full. They may look at the market, the sort of exiting that particular asset, but on the flip side, there may be opportunity for a 1031 like-kind exchange to get a very good deal on the distress side to basically redeploy that money through a like-kind exchange. And I think that might help this a little bit if you have the right matchup.
Just stepping back for a minute, I wanted to get an idea, big overview questions of the idea of decentralization, that because of COVID, people might need to, there's possibly leasing space in the suburbs, or possibly leasing space out in the outer boroughs. I guess first to the idea of the outer boroughs, Jodi, or what are you hearing about that?
I think it was even in one of the magazines today, or newsletters today, that Citibank is looking at satellite offices in New Jersey. From the outer boroughs, yeah, we've been hearing that, again, people do not want to get on a subway or commute into the city. And I think once they have confidence in transportation, that that will go away. But right now I have heard that people are looking for short-term, fully built, furnished offices in the burbs or in the 5 boroughs, so that they don't have to get on a bus or they don't have to travel in by subway. So yeah, but I don't think it's going to be something that's long-term by any stretch. I believe that, you know, again, if all of a sudden, as Jeremy said, they come out with a vaccine, people are going to want to come back into the city again.
Mm-hmm. Is there sublease coming onto the market? I mean, it's very quick, but has some of that started with somebody was in trouble to begin with and they were just like, forget it?
There have been sublets that I've heard of that are coming on, but you know, again, it's right now, a lot of the sublets that I'm hearing is rumor. I haven't seen anything in print.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's always a tendency for people to sensationalize a little bit. It's the nature of our business. I'll tell you, within our portfolio, there is not 1 square foot of sublease space that wasn't already planned well prior to COVID-19. And I think most people are taking a very pragmatic look at this, and they're saying, look, you know, we've been out for 30, 60, 90 days. You know, this is a blip in real estate parlance, right? In real estate parlance, we think in terms of, you know, decades. And companies that are planning on hiring and expanding and moving into different markets, they're also thinking on the terms of, you know, multiple years, you know, even tech companies. So, you know, again, I don't think anybody's making any big, bold moves at this point. I think people are looking at creative ways to adapt. As Jodi said, you know, if you can create a little workspace for people, you know, in a suburb that serves people as an alternative to, you know, trying to do a Zoom call over their barking dog and their screaming kids and all of those challenges, I think that's a great, you know, thing to do in the short term. But I think there's no question, you know, at least among the companies in our buildings, people are eager to get back to work. They're eager to benefit from, you know, the collaboration opportunities and the teaming opportunities and all of the things that make, you know, New York City a place that people want to work and live. You know, and as all of this thaws, I think, you know, people are gonna be delighted to start to take advantage of that again. But those early experiences, Adam, are going to be really important to people. You know, we have to get that right as a whole community. People have to feel safe and they have to be safe. And so that means they're going to have to follow the rules. They're going to have to be thoughtful. Companies, landlords are going to have to work together, which is what we've been doing. We've been talking to every one of our tenants, educating them on what we're doing and what they can do in their space to make people feel as comfortable and safe as possible.
And speaking of current tenants right now, wanted to get a sense of what you're doing with them. If somebody is asking for any kind of rent relief, Brian, how are you guys handling that?
Sure. Well, we're, you know, I think you have to look at the office product as there's Class A office with large international tenants that are continuing to operate. And then there's product that maybe has smaller spaces, and a lot of those tenants are in businesses that are severely impacted. And so if you have a you know, Class A office building, there's one approach. And if you have an office building, may even be Class A, but has a lot of small tenants, they could be in the wedding planning business. So they could be in some sort of, you know, travel related business, and they have no income coming in. So I think that the first point is we have to deal with each tenant with respect to their situation. And what I'm seeing a lot of is really just rent deferrals, with the idea that it gets made up, the rent that's deferred gets made up over a period of time, particularly at the, you know, starting in January of 2021. But mostly what I'm also finding is that the landlords who, through management, had very close relationships with their tenants are having a much easier time with these conversations than those who were a little more passive with the way that they operated with their tenants.
I was speaking with a landlord the other day who was dividing his tenants into sort of these 2 classes of how they're reacting, and he was put them in these like just brutal opportunists who are just going to basically say, you can't evict me right now anyway. Is that is that a widespread concept that someone's just trying to do what they can to get their rent reduced? And then how would you try to work with them to prove, to disambiguate the legitimate need and the sort of bogus need?
Sure. I think on the most part, we're going by the honor system for what that's worth and I think it's quite valuable. And that's why I go back to the concept of, if you have this close working relationship with your tenants, and some of our landlords, our multi-generational landlords, consider and make the tenants feel like they're part of a community, as do the larger landlords as well. I think you can know the facts in advance of what their business is, because you went through a whole process to bring them into the building. You can identify who might be trying to use the pandemic as a basis to get a benefit or to get a deferral on their rent. Asking for financials and things like that is only going to get you so far, because you really are relying on what's happened in the last couple of months. But for the most part, I think we simply have to rely on our relationships with a lot of these tenants and try to work out a situation where you can give them the breathing room to keep them in place. But I'll tell you one thing, I've had a lot of experiences with a few small tenants where clearly they were looking for an opportunity, but they were small and they were probably trouble anyway. So we, in a couple of instances, we sort of help them to the door.
From Jodi, are you working with any of the tenants to try to, on their effort, to advise them on their efforts, try to get rent reductions?
I mean, what Brian is saying is for Class A and Class B buildings, each of them have tenants in them that have been always and have financially secure and have always paid their rent. And as a landlord, obviously you would know who these tenants are.
But are you advising people right now? Like, has someone come to you and said, I need a rent reduction? Or are you actively doing that right now?
Well, they need a rent reduction, but when there's no rent reductions to be had, there are other things that we discuss with them, like free rent, or as Jeremy said, just push it further back because no one's doing any construction right now. So, yeah, they come and we have to tell them that it's not realistic to think in that vein right now. But again, I have found that the landlords have been extremely willing to listen. And if it's a viable tenant, they're willing to compromise. I mean, and there's always compromise in negotiation, especially if the tenant's been a solid tenant. If the tenant's been around for, 8 or 9 years paying their rent solidly, and they want to maybe have another year extension or another year or two extension. I mean, landlords have been very receptive to speaking about that. So it's going to be compromise on both sides.
I think I've had so many of these conversations with landlords about, particularly about how to respond to these tenant requests. And then on the flip side, with tenants trying to respond and figure out how to work with their landlords. And what's been a very consistent theme is that tenants and landlords who've had and this is what Jodi was saying, have had a good, solid, honest relationship throughout their period of time, with understandable bumps in the New York market, are finding ways to figure this out. Because I think that it's also important in any negotiation to understand the impact not only of COVID-19 and the pandemic on the tenant, but the impact on the landlord. So, you have a tenant paying rent, which pays the landlord's expenses and their mortgage loan, and the landlord then is subject to the requirements of the mortgage loan. And that mortgage lender has just so much flexibility to give relief to the landlord because they either have a warehouse line backing them up or some other structure. So I think it really goes back to having a conversation in each instance and trying to figure out how much people can give and how much flexibility there is within this ecosystem of New York City office buildings.
And Jeremy, just you're the landlord. How are you guys? Are you giving breaks or not giving breaks or extensions, or how are you handling these requests?
I think Brian and Jodi really did capture it. you know, it's case by case. If, you know, our greatest concern is with somebody that comes to us and presents financial hardship of an existential nature, you know, there the interests are aligned. We want our tenants to survive and thrive, you know, because we have lease contracts that go on for 5-10 years. You know, in fact, irrespective of COVID, if I can help my tenant generate business somehow, that's always a good thing, by introducing them to other tenants within our portfolio, or, you know, even directing our own, you know, business to them. You know, that's just being a smart operator of commercial properties.
Breaks? Have you, like, do you have examples?
Very few. I mean, in a portfolio of close to 15 million feet, at this point, we've papered only 2 rent deferrals. You know, they were with companies that were very prolific, we'll call them tech companies, and they had a certain burn rate, and they didn't underwrite COVID-19 because no one underwrote COVID-19. And they're saying, look, here's our burn rate, and this was our path to profitability, and now it looks something like this, but if you can help us, it'll do that. And when we sit down and we have that conversation, it makes sense for both parties to come to some kind of a resolution, because we'll have a tenant for 10 years, which is what we signed up for, and they'll be a going concern. So everybody wins. So, you know, as Brian said, it's all about the relationships that you foster with your tenants before these things happen, so that you can have really productive conversations when a crisis does surface like this. You know,
James,
that said, I just want to say, you know, we're fortunate. We have a portfolio that's heavily weighted towards, you know, Class A and a lot of brand new buildings, and therefore, you know, our sample set is probably a little bit different than another owner's sample set. But we have been fortunate to not have a lot of companies that have been that deeply impacted.
So James, I wanted to turn from looking more at office leasing to looking more at the sale of office buildings. When you're getting a phone call and all this COVID happened, and do people want to drop their offers, or what are you hearing from potential buyers? What if someone had an offer in at $50 million and now they don't think it's worth 40? What happens to these deals?
Right. So it depends at what stage they were at. So, you know, the first couple of weeks, what we were doing was trying to salvage the deals that we had in contract. So, you know, in New York, you get a hard deposit that's non-refundable. And so, you know, we turned our attention to those situations. And thankfully, we have not lost any sales. And it was a combination of either, you know, showing some flexibility on price. Maybe it was giving more time to close. In some cases, to give extra time, we took you know, a higher deposit, but we have been able to close 3 transactions since March. So those were all signed pre-COVID, and we were still able to get them done. And again, we've had others that you know, we were able to give more time. But you know, for the deals,
were some of those prices changed? Like, was a seller say, like, look, I'll take whatever less?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, in some of those cases, yes, we had to show some flexibility in price, because from the buyer's perspective, a typical contract deposit's 10%. So if they think that the value of the property has dropped more than 10%, in some situations, you will have buyers who will say, look, it's cheaper for me for you to take my deposit, and I'm going to walk. Then the seller has to decide, am I going to take that discount, or am I going to you know, give some flexibility in price? And also, we haven't talked about this yet, but what also plays into this is the debt market. A lot of these buyers who are in contract were expecting they were going to get 65-70% loan to value, and all of a sudden, you know, CMBS completely freezes up, and thankfully it has started to come back. Community banks have become a lot more conservative, so if now the buyer can only get 50% loan to value and they've got to raise a lot more equity, that also makes it a lot more challenging. But again, we have been able to figure it out to salvage these deals, to keep them in contract. You know, the discounts have not had to be 30, 40, 50% to get these things done. In some cases, it's been 10%, 15%, which, you know, I think all things considered, I mean, who knows where value has gone since this has happened, but we did what it took to salvage those. I mean, as far as that we had deals out in the market or even contracts in place, that's a much different situation because a buyer does not have hard money at stake. And they look, if the seller doesn't take their price, then they can, walk, no harm, no foul. So, right after this happened, I mean, we had a contract out and the buyer called back and he said, I'll only close, but if you give me a 30% discount. And I said, well, how did you come up with that number? And he said, well, that's how much the stock market dropped. So that's what I want, and who knows? I mean, we're in a process of a time of price discovery. So, we don't know how much value will be impacted. I think it's very asset specific. So if you look at the spectrum, hotels being most affected, then retail, multifamily has fared a lot better. People still need a roof over the head. Industrial, medical, again, doing the best. And, office, it really, it depends, what and where it is. But for the most part, and hearing what Jeremy and everyone else is saying, the fact that those leases are still, staying intact, the collections still sound like they're positive. So I think office is going to continue to perform very well as an asset class.
In terms of looking for opportunities, Brian, how are people trying to source ideas for where to purchase or where to construct transactions?
Sure. I guess there's a number of ways. One, to sort of look at, to go back to what James was just saying, for deals that aren't under hard contract, but there was interest in them and there was, a lot of momentum before this all happened, we're helping our clients rethink the structure of the deal. And this also goes toward looking at new opportunities. So for example, in a deal where, let's say a development site, if there's still interest in doing a development, then you can, instead of acquiring the site, maybe the landowner enters into a ground lease for the site for a period of time, and maybe there's a purchase option embedded in that ground lease so that the landlord is participating in carrying the property through this period of time and through the development process. Or maybe there's a structure in which there's a price discrepancy. I hadn't heard until James said, someone said, well, the stock market dropped 30% and so did the property. But maybe there is a price discrepancy, but no one really can price anything right now. So the landowner would contribute the asset into the joint venture and basically get the balance or the spread on the back end and be part of the development process. But one of the things that I've had the privilege of talking to so many people about who are really trying to think of predict what might happen, which is a very hard thing to do, is to take a moment, which we all have a few extra moments right now, and to go back and look at your pipeline and the pipeline of assets that you were looking at for the last 18 months to 2 years. And to think about, of those deals that were most exciting to you, why didn't you go forward with them or why didn't they happen? Because either circumstances have changed or there may have been a softening of creativity, the ability to think about a different deal structure and give you the opportunity to go back to those deals and open them up again.
Has anything resulted from that?
So actually, conversations have warmed up again. So for example, in a deal where we were looking to acquire a transaction, we are going back and saying, instead of buying the building, we'll ground lease it. In a transaction where someone wasn't ready to sell because they were in a dispute with their partner, apparently they, in this, time of introspection, they've come to an agreement and had time to talk. They may not still get along, but they're both now in agreement to sell the asset. And so you just never know while you're in your isolation situation, working with your group of people, what the other people are thinking. And there's a lot of opportunities to reach out to people and reinvigorate a discussion that you may have been having. And the beauty is not like you have to go walk the property because you already saw it.
Another kind of related idea of like where you get sourcing from is there are potentially large budget cuts to state and federal and city agencies, and that might might need money by selling buildings or something. Like, is that an opportunity?
So that's an interesting approach to this. And one idea, one thought is there are a lot of situations in municipal governments and state governments where there may be office assets that are either fully occupied or partially occupied. And there may be an opportunity to approach the municipalities and acquire those assets. It's a complicated thing because you have to really do your due diligence to understand how the budget impacts their payment of rent. But that is another way of saying, listen, it's sort of like what I think either James or Jodi said earlier about not-for-profits are the similar situation. Governments and not-for-profits are who own their buildings are property rich and cash flow poor. So there is an opportunity with not-for-profits through a ground lease or an acquisition and lease back or a contribution and joint venture with a redevelopment of the portion that they may need. It's a much more complicated with governments, but looking at not-for-profits, religious organizations in this period of time, their hard assets are an opportunity for them to raise money, particularly if they know that they're dealing with a developer that has the wherewithal to guarantee the build and deliver the product to them at the end.
We're getting some questions from some of the listeners. I want to sort of throw this one out. This is it's from John McAllister. He's asking, he's quoting someone from CBR. He recently said that he believes most rent deferral conversations are essentially behind us as a city at this point, partly because most tenants know that by now, if they're getting a PPP loan or not. Do you agree with that? Jeremy?
Yeah, I think that's probably the case. At least in the near term, we had a couple of folks that came forward and said, look, we might want to ask you for something, but we want to be responsible and see if our PPP comes through. And when it did in fact come through, they withdrew their request for rent deferral. And they said, look, I think this is going to give us what we need to ride it out. So yeah, I think that is what we're seeing at this point.
This is another question. This might be for Jodi. This is related to the sublease question, but with more specificity. It's from Michael Beta. With unemployment we're seeing, it seems that we're either going to see a lot more subleases come to the market, or many companies are expecting to bring back staff. What anecdotal reports can you share about what your tenants are saying?
So again, it depends on what tenants and who we're talking about. With the 6 foot, remember, bench seating was the thing, right? So a lot of companies did go in that direction with the bench seating. Now, how do you have bench seating if you have to sit 6 feet away from someone and people are putting up plexiglass walls? So it depends on the company. I mean, they could be taking less, they could be taking more, they could be taking space out in the burbs on a temporary situation. And then people are talking about 25% of their workforce coming back. And then people are talking about doing it every other week where you'll have 25. I mean, there are so many different ways of answering the question, but I think it's, again, tenant specific.
Yeah, and Adam, I would add to that. I mean, a lot of those comments are really, again, without a vaccine. And once there is a vaccine, then the world starts to look a whole lot different. Looking at the future viability of office, and certainly from an investment sales standpoint, the question is, are people going to be working from home? Are we going to lose tenants in the city who are going to work from the suburbs? And I just, sure, you're going to have, even though Twitter said that no one has to ever return to the office ever, they also said they're not giving up office space, right? And, this is more anecdotal and just my observation. I'd love to get the other panelists' thoughts on it. But, I mean, look at Google before this all happened. They said they are committed to adding 1,000 jobs per year in the city. Look at Facebook, whose footprint is now what? 1.5 million square feet. those are technology companies, clearly. If they could have easily figured out how to work from home by now, right? And so if that was such a good idea, why weren't they doing that before? Why was it so important that they locate in New York? It's because that is where the talent is, and people want to be in the city. They want that collaboration that only happens in the office space. And so, you know, with that in mind, you know, I think, again, once it's safe, people are really going to want to come back to the office and have that collaboration. I know for myself personally, it's, you know, sure, we can do this, we can have our calls. It's not the same. I talk to my team members once a day, you know, as a group, but the interaction that happens on the floor where I'm overhearing or this or that, it can't happen in a virtual format. So again, all in due time, but I think there's a very good case on why people are going to come back to the office in the city.
Well, Jeremy, what do you all have a specific plan when you're faced with these Facebook and Twitter that people are allowed to work from home? How do you, when you talk to them talking about leasing space, how do you argue in a sense that you do need space? Not that those are your tenants, but just that kind of argument.
Well, there's no question, you know, people value office space because it brings people together. I mean, this is how we've been working for hundreds of years, right? And people pay significant amounts of money to have the privilege of coming together and working as groups. And some of our most creative companies are you know, using more and more office space. So again, I think this is this is clearly a temporal thing. You know, a vaccine is going to change it a lot, but also just people getting back in and feeling comfortable. That's gonna accelerate the process of the repopulation of office space. You know, we have
actually just add. I would add to that you know, particularly professional service firms, there's a lot of education that goes on in between associates and partners, and you know, different people in law firms and accounting firms. That really happens over being able to walk down to someone's office or desk and talk to them and interact with them. And there have been a number of instances just in our practice at our law firm where, you know, our younger associates will say, you know, I'm glad I could reach you on the phone. If only I could just walk down the hallway and speak to you, or, you know, collaborate. And I think that is something that will give us a lot of confidence that things will come back. There are instances, there are professions where, like, you know, that you don't need to have that collaboration. But most of New York office seems to really thrive because of that collaboration and the design that led up to today.
Yeah, I mean, just to be specific, right? We've got Spotify in our portfolio. We've got Uber in our portfolio. These are companies that are eager to get back in and start doing work. And I think the conversation gets a little skewed because I just want to clear the air here, because there's a difference between saying to your people, look, we're giving you the option because we recognize there might be a discomfort. And I think that's the right thing to do. I don't think any organization should put a gun to their people's heads and say, you have to go in, you have to ride a subway, that's it. You know, you got to give people a little time to get comfortable with it. So I think it's very smart for large organizations like, you know, Facebook or Twitter to say to their employees, we're going to give you the option, right? And let people get comfortable over time. I think that's the right way to do it. And I think there's going to be a natural progression that way.
And I think it should be duly noted that, you know, in all the surveys that I'm hearing, millennials are the single group of people, and these are the employees of the Facebooks and the Twitters that want to come back to work. I mean, for the past, 3 months, they've been in their homes operating on their laptops. And a lot of their homes are with 3 or 4 other people they're sharing their apartments with. And they want to be with other people. They're clamoring to get back to the office. So I thought it was interesting that millennials were the largest group that want to come back.
Is the city or individual landlords going to try to come up with a program, essentially as a promotional program of here's why you should be in an office? I think, you know, I certainly believe we should be in an office. I don't want to be working in my house, but not just an office, but a New York office. Is that something that that New York landlords feel that they need to do to kind of re-promote as a comeback?
I think it's self-evident. I mean, you know, we've got people calling us asking, okay, you know, tell us what the plan is. You know, are you guys all set? Yes, we're all set. Here's the plan. You know, they're asking us for the plan faster than we have the plan because they're so eager to get back in. And I think phasing it is the right way to do it. It's you know, you can't just have everybody come flooding back in order to maintain social distancing, you know, in elevators and public transportation systems. And again, to just get people comfortable because, you know, perception is this, reality is this. So a big part of this is just getting people comfortable. And even as Jodi said, that discomfort may be, you know, wildly overstated when you look at the population, the sizable population that really is ready to come back to work as soon as it's permitted.
In terms of the type of tenants that might not be coming back, you know, are you having or not that they won't be coming back, but they might need to be subletting some of their space? Is that a conversation you're starting to have? Jodi, are you having conversations with any of your tenants that have had to sublet some space or condensed space?
No, I haven't. I have not had one phone call about that. I mean, I've read about it, but I have not had a conversation at all about that.
And Brian, are you in your practice? Are you guys looking at any?
You know, I think that I think a lot of it is really a wait and see attitude for people committing to other than people who before this needed to expand their office space or relocate in New York. It's a wait and see attitude. And because, you know, and the one thing I would emphasize, and we touched on it earlier with some of Jeremy's tenants, for example, who at first thought they needed help and then they got the CARES Act money, is if you are in a position as a tenant or a landlord and it's an intractable position either with your lender or with your tenant or with your landlord and you can't seem to find a way out, what's very interesting is that watching sort of how the CARES Act was designed and then changed on a nightly basis and evolved is an example of why when you're stuck, just try to extend and get more time, because more time and space allows you to do what a lot of people are doing, is waiting and seeing. And whether it being, you know, figuring out a way to keep people in the space, but still paying what they can, or whether it be, you know, continuing to work with your lender and continuing to pay your lender as much as you can in an agreed portion, to just hang on as we watch this thing evolve and see what happens, because there could be opportunities for either government relief or a different structure. It's the same way of going back and revisiting old opportunities, because everything is changing so quickly right now.
One interesting thing that I was speaking with Jeremy about is sort of concepts of reconfiguring stuff. We were talking about in one of your buildings where a restaurant might serve food for or provide food for office tenants. It's not really like an office business thing, but it's just like an interesting. What is that?
I think you know, circumstances are presenting us with a lot of challenges, and to meet those challenges, we've got to be creative and think outside the box. And in the process, we may discover, just like touring space, we may discover better ways of doing things. So we started to think, okay, what's the first day going to be like for that person who comes into the office and rides the subway and walks into the lobby? They're going to have to eat lunch. And some people may feel comfortable, you know, going downstairs and getting a delivery or doing pickup from, you know, their local place if it's open that day. But if not, you know, one of the things we can do for people is to provide for delivery within the building if we happen to have a restaurant or a food retailer in the building. And we're accomplishing a few things by doing that. We're obviously helping support that tenant of ours, a retailer who's otherwise struggling, and we're making it that much easier and comfortable for people when they return to work. So this is something that we're doing at a building that we have at downtown 120 Broadway. It's a building that was built in 1912. And at the top, it had the old Bankers Club, which is a historic club that we've sort of turned into a millennial version of that. And Great Performances, you know, operates the food concession there. So we've now talked to them about making deliveries within the building, and they're all set up to do that. Similarly, we have a building in Philadelphia with a club at the top where we've done the same thing. I think these opportunities are going to present themselves for a lot of landlords to partner with, you know, restaurants and retail, you know, to serve the population within the building.
Well, I'd like to stop here. It's 2 o'clock. I want to thank everyone for participating and thank everyone for listening. If you enjoyed this, please tune in. We've got upcoming panels, and one of them will be revisiting topic we covered before, which is bankruptcy. We're going to take a look at 12 specific bankrupt situations in New York City courts and discuss where they are in the process, which will be very sort of lively, kind of getting in the weeds. So watch for your inbox for that and for a video link to this. And it'll have also information on our newsletters and such. So I'd like to thank our guests, Jodi Pulice, James Nelson, Jeremy Moss, and Brian Cohen. And thanks for joining us. And please have a good afternoon. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Adam. Really appreciate
Thank
it. Thank you.